we are heavily involved in thinking, which could include, oh, I don't get this spiritual seeking business. Why is there suffering? The more and more thinking there is, the more and more confined the boundaries get. The thinking tends to make everything feel much more contracted, because the content is very specific. The thinking mind content makes everything very narrow. And so the invitation is that in any moment you can just re-emerge, or allow attention to re-emerge into the present moment. And what that really means is to exchange the commentary about this, that, and the other for a presence. And so if you rest, these are words that just come from the experience of it. So the word rest means a dropping into, a dissolving, a falling back of the thinking mind. So if there is an awareness of what is right here, right now, we see that so many of the components of the thinking mind are brought into the present moment by the thinking mind. That if we could press pause on the story, or rather if we become present with what is, the story gets paused, because so much of what is being created by the thinking is not actually here in the present moment. Now, the thinking mind and the psychological me has taken so many things very personally. And so even though a person that has done something to us, that has delivered pain, even though they're not in the present moment, the thinking mind says, I don't care that they're not in the present moment. They hurt me and it's personal, and so I have to think about it. I have to blame them. And it's a compulsion. If there is an insistence on coming into the present moment when certain energies are strong enough, it just isn't possible to remain uninvolved in the story. The energy of that thinking will drag the thinking back up so that it is what is present. So this notion that I'm putting forward about the dissolving of the thinking mind, the dropping into the present moment, that's not something that you can do whenever you want, because sometimes the energy behind the thinking is so intense that it means there isn't going to be a dissolving into the present moment. However, at other times, we will find that attention comes back onto, let's say, the flowers and the trees if you happen to be sitting outside. And in that moment, we might find that attention can be focused on the fact that there is just nature, let's say, that the other person who we feel has hurt us, spoken behind our back, or done something that we don't think is up to scratch. Even though that has happened, we might find ourselves being present, meaning focusing on the content that is right now, what is, and the visual is a very significant component of what is. Visual and sound. Coupled with a dropping into a sense of I amness. And the sense of I amness is essentially the essence, the consciousness that is flowing in the present moment. It's that presence, that consciousness that at its core includes awareness. Awareness and beingness. And it is awareness that is aware of and not separate from the content of the present moment. If the content was separate from awareness, meaning if the content was outside of the field of awareness, it wouldn't exist as an object in the present moment or as content in the present moment. So if a dog, let's say, is barking outside of the field of awareness, we could say theoretically that can happen. Maybe there are dogs outside of our field of awareness barking right now, and yet that object isn't in our present moment experience because it is outside of the field of awareness. And so using this deductive logic, this rule, we might notice, if the tree or the lamp or the other person is part of our present moment, it must mean that they arise, they exist within the field of awareness and therefore are not separate from the field of awareness. And the body, our own body, is an object witnessed, an object within the present moment. That means that the body is not separate from the awareness that is aware of it. And this dropping into being, abiding in I am, is a movement that needs to be established in order for the thinking mind to potentially have the potential to have breaks in it. It's a bit like swapping activities. So it might arise just as a reminder, a thought might arise that says stop. And stop is just a reminder to come into being. The commentary is very superfluous. The commentary about the other and where we're going in life. It covers up what's here, what's true, what's real. Where when the thinking mind is functioning, there is essentially the exchanging of what is, exchanging what is, which includes awareness of our awareness or presence, exchanging that for a thought narrative. And as we become more aware of our thinking as something very changing, very relative, very limited, not at all absolute, we may start to realize that thinking can't possibly be what we call real, can't possibly be what is referred to as essence or truth. There really isn't anywhere to go or anything to do in this movement. It's a realization that there isn't something to achieve that maybe allows a dropping out of the thinking mind that is trying to get somewhere, trying to achieve something. It may be what cuts off the thinking mind, just realizing there isn't a job to do. Because awareness is by default aware. So we don't even need to be aware. So the dropping into I am or abiding in I am, in presence, really means a falling away of the thinking mind that drags us out of being. And that's not something that we can say, oh, I am going to stop thinking now. Because that very movement of the doer that says, I am going to stop thinking now, is thinking. And it just doesn't have the power to stop the thinking. The only thought that can have the power to stop thinking is one that just arises spontaneously. Now, when I talk about it arising spontaneously, it's not some sort of magic. It's just a result of your up-to-date conditioning. So if the words that I'm putting forward now land in such a way that the message is received that says, so much of spiritual seeking, or at least the spiritual movement, the transformation, is about a stopping, about a being. And that being isn't a doing because it's innate, it's our essence. And so when the other doing, the thinking, stops, we find ourselves rolling back into being. So if that becomes received as the message, and a part of you says, yes, this is about just stopping the habitual movement that has become so ingrained and assumed to be our mission, stopping the movement of seeking outwardly into the future. So if that gets set in place, then as you're going through your day, you may find that when the thinking mind is happening, a thought arises just at the same time as awareness lands on the fact that the thinking mind is active, and the thought could be just stop. So awareness registers the thinking mind, the blame, for example, or the expectation, and out of our conditioning, but not the conditioning of doership and attachment to outcome, but a new conditioning that is going to cut off the thinking mind. The thought stop arises and maybe cuts off the thinking mind. And that's when we find ourselves just quiet. So that's what is meant by life is a happening. That when we look at it, the thought stop just happens. It comes out of our condition. And that thought that comes out of the up-to-date conditioning, that isn't the doer that says, oh, this is my mission, this is what I need to do, I need to stop thinking. That's not, that too is a spontaneous thought, but it's a spontaneous thought of the doer, and so it doesn't have that same samurai sword cutting power. And we may find that this resting in being is available a lot on some weeks, and then at other times we feel very disconnected from presence, and no matter what intention we have of dropping into being, it's just not available. And that's destiny, that's life unfolding, that's predetermined, it's inevitable that sometimes the presence, the essence of who we are isn't going to be available because the thinking mind is so active. And the teaching is not really, on the one hand, I'd say that the teaching is all about happiness in daily living. But the teaching is also emphasizing, as part of this movement towards happiness in daily living, that you and I are not the doer. What that means is we're not in control. If we were in control, that would mean that the seeking would finish, because we would have controlled it. And so the core message is that life is a happening, that we're not the doer. Everything is happening as it's determined to happen. And so from time to time, there is no doubt that suffering is going to be there, present, and a resistance of the suffering is going to be there from time to time. Suffering or involvement with the involvement. And that's inevitable. Now, if we start finding that a relaxation with the primary suffering starts to happen, which means the suffering is there and something says what to do. When I say something, it's the working mind that has understood that when suffering is destined to be there, it's like a headache. It's going to be there for a set period of time, then it'll fall away. And if the headache, as an analogy, and remember the headache is pain and suffering is a psychological thinking movement. So let's understand that the headache is just an analogy for something that comes, it lasts, and then it falls away. And suffering is going to be there. And while it's there, there's going to be an uncomfortableness. And that's why the secondary involvement comes in, because it's there isn't an acceptance that uncomfortableness is part of life. And so then the secondary involvement comes in, which is another layer of uncomfortableness. So at some point, we have to surrender, meaning the body-mind organism needs to understand that fighting suffering is futile. But once again, that's not something that a doer gets to say, oh, I am going to surrender, but rather when enough experience is there, for example, to see that your involvement in involvement is more suffering, at some point it just says stop. It doesn't help to be involved in the involvement. Now, a lot of, so people can hear that, seekers can hear that and say, oh, I understand it, but it just doesn't cut off the involvement. That doesn't mean anything's gone wrong. That's because that's destiny unfolding. So we can understand that there is no benefit in resisting the resistance or getting involved in the involvement. And yet in practice, there will sometimes be involvement in the involvement. And the feedback might be, why is that happening? Because I understand that involvement in the involvement is just more suffering. So why is it happening? And the answer is simple. You're not the doer. It's happening because it's destiny unfolding. And all of that, the circumstance, which is really the pleasure or the pain of the circumstance, the whether it's hot, whether it's cold, whether there's a lot of noise, whether someone is talking to you in a nice way or not a nice way, whether you're driving or whatever the circumstance is content. That's part of what is predetermined. And the suffering is, and the thinking and the emotions are all part of the content. The whole shebang, the whole box and dice is content. The suffering is a content which is an involvement, a thought involvement with the circumstantial content. And so we can break it down into circumstantial content and psychological content, or the thinking mind. And the working mind content is more akin to part of the circumstantial content. So it's not, the working mind clearly isn't sight or sound or touch, but it is thinking that is part of what we would call the flow of life. It isn't a thinking of the psychological me. It is functional thinking. So if someone asks you, which way do I turn at the end of the street to get to the shops? Do I go left or right? You say, oh, yep, go to the end of the street and turn left. Now that is thought that's turned into speech, because there's a processing of the question and there is thinking about it. It's the working mind. And then the words say, go to the end of the street and turn left. And that's part of the circumstance. If, however, the person then takes the information, turns around and walks off and doesn't say thank you or anything, we might then find a thinking that comes in that is a thinking about the circumstance. When I say, who does this guy think he is? Not even a thank you? How rude. And so that thinking about what has happened, especially if it sees that as the lack of a thank you as an attack on who I am, and takes it very personally, and then blames the other as if that is not how life possibly could have been intended to turn out. So it says, you are the doer and you should have said thank you. And I can't, like, we don't have anything inside of us that says, this is destiny unfolding. This is my destiny for that person to not say thank you. If that was present, then the thinking mind would get cut off. So let's say that wasn't present, so the thinking mind kicks in, and there's blame towards the other about what happened in the past. And that is content, and we can call that the psychological thinking or the thinking mind. And we're separating that out from the circumstantial to our attitude to the circumstance. And so the suffering, the thinking mind, arises always in the form of attitude to circumstance. Guilt, blame, pride, those three are based on the interpretation of myself and the other as a separate, independent entity in control of everything we think, say, feel, and do. So that's the assumption or attitude of personal doership. And then, on that basis that I am the doer and the other is the doer, when the other does something that doesn't deliver us pleasure, or when we do something that ends up delivering pain, we look at ourselves. The attitude is, I am the doer and I should have done it differently, and I hate myself for doing it. I hate the other for what they did. Now, this word hate is usually kept and used to describe an intense dislike, or not even dislike, an intense, hatred for the other. And in the teaching, even if someone uses all the milk up in the fridge, and you open the fridge and you want and you realize that someone's finished all the milk, or they've left it out and it's gone bad or whatever, then if blame arises, part of the psychological me, that's referred to as hatred. And that's because when we look at the in principle blame, it is, I can't accept you, and I can't accept what has happened. I can't accept what has happened through you. And that is exactly the same attitude that is there for events, outcomes that are much more intense, where there is a hatred that is felt in an intense way, where someone might want to kill someone because they hate them so much for something that they have done. And in principle, it's exactly the same feeling as someone who has left the milk out and the milk's gone bad and you don't have milk. In principle, in intensity, it's not the same. So the description is that blame is, you hurt me by leaving the milk out of the fridge and it's gone bad. So by depriving me of my pleasure, you hurt me. You hurt me, I hate you. And it's self-hate, guilt. I did this that has resulted in the hurting of someone I care about, or even a stranger, or myself. And so I hurt myself or another, and I hate myself. That's guilt and shame. And pride is based on the same attitude of personal doership, but in relation to outcomes that deliver positive outcomes. And it's, look what I have achieved as the doer. And if this seeing myself as the orchestrator or the doer of the action, meaning the agent, the one that made it happen, if If that falls away, then whatever happens is seen to be destiny unfolding. And the narrative of, oh, I hate myself for what I did, gets cut off essentially because it's known it couldn't have happened differently. And I am not the one that made it happen. There is no doer there when we look at it more closely. When we look at the functioning of a human being, we find that there is the biological instrument with its genes and up-to-date conditioning that is functioning as a very complex machine. And the idea of a me has been set in place as part of the human development, and it's a fictitious idea. It's a fictitious identity, and at the root of that identity, the assumption that there is someone doing all of this is mistaken. Why is it mistaken? It's mistaken because that idea assumes that the thinking is happening because of a volitional entity. And in fact, the thinking is happening because of a machine that has been developed by life to think. Now, when I say machine, we're like biological robots. So it's not a reducing the human down to machinery. It's describing what the human being is, a very complex biological organism, and saying, really, when we get down to it, a biological organism is a form of machine. So the thinking happens because the machinery is the way it is. And who created the machinery? I didn't create the machinery. I am the creation. I'm not the creator. And the creation has mistaken itself as a creator and says, I, the me doer, did the speaking. Now, if the me is replaced by the working mind that says, well, I speak, I eat, but I know that what I am is a biological instrument, then we can use the word I, and it doesn't create the same uncomfortableness of self as the me idea. So often there is a fight with the word I. The word I is only a problem if someone's relationship to I is I as a separate individual entity, I as a separate individual doer. Because then each time we say I, it means I as a separate doer, I as a separate entity insulated from life, meaning not affected ever by life. And so therefore everything that happens is not a result of something else, but is a result of me that is separate and independent. And when we investigate, we find that's a ludicrous idea. No matter which model of life you look at, whether you look at it as life as a material, objective reality based on time and cause and effect, then we find that I can't be separate from life, because if I was separate from life, which is the me idea, then that means I'm insulated from life, which means the sun can't burn me. Because if the sun burns me, it means I'm not separate from the sun. It means someone's words can't hurt me. And not only can't hurt me, if I'm separate, it means I can't hear them. I can't shake hands with someone. So the idea that I am a separate insulated entity is completely ludicrous when we look at the experience. The experience is that we're swimming in life. We're immersed in life, and we're always being impacted and affected by life. So why this resistance to the word I happens after certain insights and awakenings is because the seeker realizes, oh, I've been calling myself I my whole life. And the insight shows there is no I, but what it's really showing is there is no separate individual entity. There is just the arising of movement and thoughts and feelings. So so I just described how looking at life as an objective reality, we see we're not separate, we're not insulated. And if life is seen as a spontaneous experiencing consciousness, that's the other perspective we can have on it, then it becomes equally obvious that the human being is not separate from the experience. They are one with the experience. The human being, which when we really break it down in the experience, is a sense of being the body. So that means the presence of the body in a field of awareness, and what we can call an identification in the experience, meaning the experience is created with a sense that that's who I am. And then thoughts that arise and are layered on top of the body, and emotions and feelings. And so the whole momentary experience, which is continually arising fresh and creating the impression of linear time, means everything in that experience is one with the experience, is not separate. It's like a painting, and one of the trees that might look like a separate object, when we see it as part of the painting, we see that there's a whole forest of trees and some birds and some flowers and some ocean, and it's one painting. So this notion of separation and doership is completely illusory. So if it's a spontaneous arising, meaning there is no doer, there is just the experience, then the words are arising from source, the feelings are arising from source, the sense of a body is arising from source, and source is the moving experience, just like a dream at night is a moving experience in consciousness, and the dream characters are created by the dream. They are part of the dream, and their thoughts, their feelings, their words, their actions are not their own, but one with the dream. They are the creation and not the creator. The creation is the dream, and they are part of it. So whichever way we look at it, there is no doer. So after various realizations and insights, a seeker may have problem with the word I, because they haven't really seen that you can say I and not mean me. Not mean, when I say me, not mean I as meaning a separate, independent doer. But until we redefine the word I, if it maintains its old meaning of I, a separate independent doer, then there'll be a resistance, and rightly so, to use the word I, because if we keep saying I, we keep reinforcing the old idea of ourselves that within a certain insight or realization has shown us to be fictitious. So I encourage anyone who thinks that I is the problem to redefine more specifically the problem as being the idea of a person who is the doer. If you see there is a person or there is a human being, and we can say, well, the human being is speaking, Roger is speaking, but as long as Roger knows that Roger is essentially a body-mind organism programmed by life and functioning according to its design, then that body-mind organism is not confused about its is not confused and thinks it is an independent entity controlling the speaking. It realizes it is a biological instrument forced to speak. And so if the speaking says something silly or hurtful, there can be an attitude that says, I was forced to function that way. That doesn't mean we can excuse it in terms of saying, oh, it's fine to hurt people. It doesn't mean that, because the biological instrument can understand, I don't want intentionally to hurt people. So if I'm forced to say something hurtful, meaning my genes and up-to-date conditioning, which dictate the words, if the words come out and it's hurtful, I can understand that that was my genes and up-to-date conditioning, couldn't have happened any other way, but I can recognize that that nonetheless has hurt someone, and so in the next breath can apologize for it. Sincerely apologize for it, and see that the apology is also a happening according to the genes and up-to-date conditioning. And what is important is that there is an attitude of non-doership that doesn't get in the way of continuing to function according to our genes of up-to-date conditioning, which could include making amends for something that has hurt the other. And if they don't accept your explanation, your apology, then at some point you might say, well, it seems like it's destiny for them to not accept my explanation, which means their genes and up-to-date conditioning are forcing them to not accept it. And I've done what I can. I see that it was not ideal that those words came out of my mouth and hurt the person. I apologized for it. And they haven't accepted it. So this is destiny. I'm not the doer, they're not the doer. And the situation is dropped. The other person may not drop it. The other person may keep thinking about the words I have said for the next 20 years with hatred towards me for what I have said. And that is their suffering, because the attitude of non-doership that has taken those words very personally, because it feels like that is an attack on who they are, is in place. It does mean that potentially that is pain in my life, because, for example, they stop being my friend, which would mean the end of that pleasure. Or it might mean that they find ways of delivering pain on a routine basis, or whenever we see each other, they come and, get angry at me. And that's obviously not my preference. I would much rather not be exposed to anger. And if that happens, then they're not accepting the apology, means they're suffering on an ongoing basis. And from time to time, pain for me, if they deliver that pain through their behavior. But if I were never to see them again, the situation has been seen as a happening, not excused, but understood to not have been able to happen any other way. And then no more thinking about it. They may think about it for the next 20 years. And that's their suffering. So I think we'll move on to some questions. Hi, Jim.
Can you hear me?
Hi, Jim.
Hi, Roger. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, I have one short question. Before some days, when I was sitting here in my home, I have an experience, so-called, and I wonder if what I felt is the true, if it was the truth. So what I felt is I was observing everything, my thoughts, my emotion, and so on. At some point, I cannot, and I cannot longer observe anything, and I see like a black screen. In this state, I saw myself everywhere. This uh, continued for some minutes, or maybe it was an hour. From that moment till now, this state has not go away. So I wonder, and I start to read or see or to watch some videos. What is this? Is this something that my mind does it, or because I can see it when I go to bed or when I wake up in the morning? Everything. It is in every experience. And sorry for my English, I don't speak very good. And I can observe it everywhere through my thoughts, through when I eat, when I sit, and it doesn't go away. I feel like I am it. I don't know exactly what it is, and I have the feeling that I never come to a point that I can say this is it, because it is not. I feel it is not something like an object.
Mm-hmm.
So this brings me periods, uh, certain beliefs that comes and goes, and even and if I have to think or if I have to do anything, that allows me to do what I want, and I can, and when that thing is over and I sit back in silence, this blossoms again. That is my question.
Okay. At the very beginning, you said you had an experience. Um, everything went to, you saw a black screen,
Yeah,
and you saw yourself everywhere, right?
yes.
Um, so when you said you saw yourself, what I have a sense about what you mean, because afterwards you referred to yourself in several different ways. Um, but when specifically when you say you saw yourself everywhere, tell me what you don't mean by that.
I don't mean like an emotional, romantic sort of state, like, oh, I'm going to and give a hug to a tree. Um, I I I mean it as it is. I don't know what I say exactly. I feel I am in inside everything, inside the tree, inside, not just like a romantic.
Yeah. But so when you say you saw yourself, or I feel like I am inside everything, you obviously don't mean your normal
No,
image of yourself.
no,
Yeah.
something vaster, something more universal.
Yeah. So reading in between the lines of what you're saying, it's essentially you are describing a shift in identity from what would be referred to as identification with form, meaning identification with the body and with thinking. So that's what we historically and traditionally develop into knowing ourselves as, a physical entity that is operating in a world of form. And there is, it would, you could call that an awakening experience, awakening shift,
I,
where
I
the
don't.
sense of self. Sorry, go on.
Yes, I don't want to like it to call it an awakening because I felt it more like a death. I don't feel like I am awakened now. I feel like I am free to do whatever I want, and I don't take it personally like in the past.
Yes. So why it's called an awakening? So obviously it depends on what you project into the word. But why it's called an awakening? It's called an awakening of the sense of self that was previously hidden,
Oh,
the sense of self that was previously not available. And so you awake, there is a waking up to that, a recognizing of that, a realization of that. So you don't have to call it awakening, but that's why the word awakening is appropriate, because this shift is a shift where there is a sense that what I am is formless awareness. What I am is the space in which the experience of life happens. Um, what I am is alive, or is awareness and existence, awareness and being, and there is a very different quality to to one's sense of self in that form. So as you said, then life is not taken personally. It's not received from the perspective of a limited body mind organism
yes,
that feels like it is happening to me, but rather it is all just happening.
yes, and also I don't feel that I am something different, and I feel like uh, all there is me. There is no people, nature, nothing, and then and also everything is. I don't know. I feel like I'm taking myself like a god, but I don't know how to describe it.
You're taking yourself like a.
Like I'm a god and everything is me, and but I don't know how to describe it.
Well, when you know, in in philosophy or psychology, there are different states of this. So someone could hear what you're saying and they could say that's solipsism. So solipsism is where you feel like you are the center of the universe and it's all happening for
Oh
you.
no,
But
no,
solipsism is an egoic sense, as
yeah,
I understand it.
yes,
What you're describing, if because you're in non-duality seeking, it makes sense that these awakenings, these shifts, these realizations are going to happen in a way that is different to a psychosis or psychology shift or identity. So what you're describing is a sense that I am God, the God of this experience. But you're not talking about I as the body am
No,
like a Superman. you're not
no,
you're not talking about that. Yeah, but the formless awareness on which everything depends. So without this awareness that contains the whole experience, there wouldn't be the experience, which is why we feel like I am everywhere and I am nothing but everything and not separate from everything. And therefore, everything is happening inside and within what I am. Now, I wouldn't take that too literally because we can think that that is the whole universe. Our thinking can say the whole universe is arising inside of what I am. Now, I would agree with using those words as long as we understand that what we mean by the whole universe means everything that we are aware of. Now, everything that we're aware of doesn't necessarily mean the whole universe as it can be known, the planets and the stars. If we have an experience of the sun, then we can say, yes, the sun is arising inside what I am, because the sun it's really an image in the present moment. But we can get carried away because there might be something outside of our experience. And that there may be an objective universe that doesn't exist inside of our experience. So keep in mind that you are the God of your experience.
no, I don't want to
Which,
feel like I am a god, but
yes, but it doesn't sound like you are talking about a God that is in control. When you look at your experience, it's more like a awareness rather than creative power or control.
yes.
And awareness is quite passive. So that God is quite a harmless God. It is not a God that is going to impose anything on anyone. It is
And
just a God of
also,
awareness.
if I may say, uh, God, he um, uh, he is also observable. So I feel like I'm not him. I feel like God is an image of people. So something much deeper.
Yeah, you said God is not observable, right?
No, I say God is also observable because he made in the mind of people, of men.
Right.
People made him and projected him. Universe
Yeah.
and
Yeah. So you know God through the expressions that must be an expression of God.
yes, and the expressions are limited. I don't want to say that they are not true, but they are limited.
Yes. Yes. I'm happy with that.
Yes. I
So
don't know.
enjoy. Um, just allow it to be. Um, if if it needs to change or if there is more movement, then it will happen. Um, I'm sure that you can sense more space and freedom and
Yes,
ease
yes,
in that state.
yes. And this is like 3, 4 months now. I observe it every day, and it is there.
Yes, I think that sounds very much like the emergence of awareness of awareness.
Yes, that's right. So, thank you, Roger. That's.
Thank you, Jim. It's good to hear that this is happening.
No, thank you.
Hi, Schumann.
Hello, Roger. Hello, thank you very much for the talk and the meditation you did earlier. My question is, it is to do with the doership. I think I struggle with it, and because what's come to mind is, for example, it's really to do with thinking. So, for example, I think one of the major tobacco companies in the 1940s were concerned that women didn't smoke, and they saw it as a huge loss of revenue. So they even brought along, I think it might have been Freud's grandson, to help them in how to manipulate women into smoking. And basically, what Freud's grandson suggested is that it would be good to link it to the suffragette movement, and that also what is in the advantage is that cigarettes also subconsciously looks like a phallic symbol, and the way to get women to smoke is to say, well, these are torches of liberation, and link it to the suffragettes. And I feel this is the sort of thinking which shapes the world. Also with Vietnam, I know indirectly the Soviet Union was involved with that, and afterwards the Americans wanted some kind of revenge, and and then you had Afghanistan and the funding of the terrorists by the Americans. But there's a great deal of energy going into this thought manipulation, which seems to be, to me, to be a kind of doership. And I am aware that, like, for example, when we did the meditation, I was aware in the thoughtless state, thinking seems delusional. It seems unintelligent. It just seems like it's not my nature, because the nature of thought is attachment. But yet, if there is no doership, whatever is manipulating human affairs, it doesn't seem to be very intelligent. I mean, it might be intelligent in the IQ sense, like manipulating women to smoke, so it increases your profits. But I just struggle, because it does seem to be like a sense of doership. We need this. We are losing money. We need to achieve this, and they achieved their aims. They got what they wanted and managed to manipulate women to smoke.
Right. Well, doership just means your attitude to life. If you see it as a happening, that's non-doership. If you see it as someone's doing, then that's the attitude of doership, right? So it has nothing to do with the other. It's got to do with your attitude towards what's happening.
So, in terms of my attitude could be, well, but the sense of doership comes up if there's an attachment, like I need this, I need to have control and manipulate. And I also understand how to manipulate someone else. Is that?
Yeah, but it's always about your own attitude, right? So if you're looking out, and so the other day someone was asking me about, sages or masters that have done things that are unacceptable or not, nice things, not, and then are they still a master because they've done whatever, stealing or sexual activities and whatever? And it's like, who cares? Like, the point is, it's about your attitude towards the circumstance. Like, to worry about whether they have doership or not, right, is like missing the point. It's like, who cares about life? Is going to, there's going to be things that happen that aren't as we would like them. And it comes down to our attitude. So we don't need to ask questions about, was that master enlightened or are they a master? What we're interested in is our own freedom, which really means, let me see that action as just another action, like all the other actions that happen through myself and the others. And if I have the attitude of non-doership, then I'm seeing it all as a happening, which means sometimes pleasure, sometimes pain. If, however, I'm saying, they shouldn't have acted like that, they definitely can't be a master if they acted like that, because they're a master, they shouldn't act like that. All of that is the attitude of doership towards the other, trying to decide whether the other has an attitude of doership or non-doership. And so the whole point of the teaching is, let's just see life as a happening. And whether that happens or not is not our doing, it's a happening. So if you say, well, seeing life as a happening just isn't happening, why is that? The answer is because we're not the doer. Life is going to unfold exactly the way it unfolds.
I feel in one sense there can be like the perception of something quite intelligent or wise when you're not in the thought state. There seems to be a refined intelligence which has no motive. I mean, that's the key. There's no motive. It just is, and it's just so fine. It's just unattached to everything, to anything. It's just freedom. And yet, my concern is there's the other thing, which is slightly linked to thought, is that, well, I can cultivate stillness, but there's a motivation there. Or I can even say, who cares? But there's a motivation. It's to cover up my vulnerability. Now, I think both exist in me. Because I get the sense that there's just complete freedom, but also I don't want to be, what's the word? I don't want to be, I want to be honest. I don't want to be dishonest. And I've got, dishonest in the sense that I can use non-duality as a form of escapism, because I can be blissed out. But that to me isn't the truth of the matter. I can see both sides, but there is that there could be, if I'm not alert enough, there could be the temptation to use it as a form of escapism.
And if you're not careful, you could use it as a form of getting attached, right?
Yes, definitely.
So it's about, making an effort or meditating doesn't mean doership, because when the attitude of non-doership falls away, we still, go for a walk, which clearly has there's a reason for it. We want to enjoy nature, or we want to exercise, or we want to get from A to B. We will hang up the clothes because we want them to dry, and go and weed the garden because we don't want weeds in it. So there are activities continue to happen, and with an intended outcome. The issue is, are we attached to the outcome? So if you hang up the clothes or do something, we need to see the difference between doing something to get an outcome and being attached to the outcome. They're two different things. So if you meditate because you know it helps you get grounded or centered, that's okay. But if you don't find yourself grounded or centered on a particular day, hopefully there isn't the attachment that needed to happen. So when you say, doing something in your seeking is a doing, meaning there's a doer there. It's not necessarily the case. It depends whether it's being done with a certain attitude.
Yes, and the attitude of attachment, which breeds suffering. Where there's any kind of attachment to outcome, there's inevitably suffering. Doesn't matter
Yes,
whether it's
but attachment to outcome doesn't mean, it's not the same as intention. Because when I go to the shops to do the weekly shopping, I have the intention of buying food. If my car breaks down on the way, I can laugh and go, you see, my intention was there, but it looks like it's not going to be delivered. Because there's no attachment to the outcome. If the attachment to the outcome is there, then the breaking down of the car is going to create a frustration relative to the outcome that I'm attached to.
Yes, thank you for putting it like that. That's so true. Yes, there is the attention, but that's very distinct from the attachment of outcome.
Yeah.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the earlier meditation you did earlier. Really beautiful.
You're welcome, Schumann. Thanks
Thank you
for
very
dropping
much.
in.
Thank you. Thank you.
Welcome.
Bye.
Bye now. Hello, Holger.
Hello, Roger. I just want to quickly say a big thank you for your beautiful words and your presence. And I could ask a question: if thinking mind and presence are parts of the interrelated opposites, but we don't need to go into this. I'm feeling happy without an answer right now.
All right. Okay. Technically, I would say that they're not interrelated opposites. Presence is outside of the interconnected opposites. So presence is that which is aware of the interconnected opposites. And the thinking mind, you could say, is an interconnected opposite of the working mind. Or yeah, it's a bit tricky. You could also say that the thinking mind is, well, you could say that the thinking mind is sort of like a interconnected opposite to peace of mind, and that the thinking mind is outside of interconnected opposites. That interconnected opposites are the pleasure and pain, and outside of that, there is the attitude, and the attitude is either the presence of the thinking mind or the absence of the thinking mind. So I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. Would it be okay to say that the thinking mind is more like a cocoon until something in us is mature enough to see and allow or recognize the present?
Yes. I think, when that starts happening, the presence starts arising, you can say it is a maturity or a maturing, a transition from an attitude of the thinking mind to a different attitude. And until that new attitude has set in, then, the best we have, which is not very good, but or all we have is the attitude of doership and attachment to outcome. So yeah, I think you can say it's a metamorphosis.
Beautiful.
From one to the other.
Beautiful. In the beginning, at the beginning of the satsang, you sounded a little chesty, like you're breathing. How do you feel right now? Isn't it amazing that the harmony of satsang? I mean, do you feel different right now?
I can't say I feel different, but maybe I sound different.
Okay, wonderful. Yeah. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Holger. Hello, Krishna.
Hey, Roger. Good to see you. Thank you so much, as always, for these satsangs.
You're welcome.
It's just a quick question, again, more on like the practical side of how things unfold, I guess. I just want to like get a sense of difference between events that happen after realization takes place in a person and events that happen before. Like let's say you and me. For myself, let's say events A, B, and C happen in my life where realization hasn't taken place, and I go through a sense of guilt, regret, some happiness, a little bit of physical pain, and some suffering. Just as an in the unfolding of these three events, A, B, and C. In the life of a realized person, let's say that A, B, and C, a separate set of events that are supposed to happen in his life, also happen in the same order, but in their case, I guess the sense of regret, shame, or like the 5 feelings that you frequently mention will not have this. Is that fair to say?
You said will not arise, right?
Will not arise.
Yes. To me, that is the significant difference. Okay. Is that the events will happen, but the attitude to the events will be very different.
Okay. So
that essentially is the change.
Yeah. So in that case, I guess this might be a dumb question, but after realization, there is no effect on the influence of the events that might happen. In other words, the events that are supposed to happen will happen.
Yes, but having said that, we don't know what the events are, and so after realization, the structure of the events or the role that the person plays in the event may well be different to what the event would have looked like if it was destined to happen at some other point in their life, as in, let's say, prior to realization. Because some activity changes. We may well have been motivated to go out socializing much more before realization than after realization, simply because before realization an attachment to outcome and a sense of self defined by outcomes may have been driven and attracted to social interactions more so than after self-realization. And so then we could say that the events that happen after are going to be structurally or circumstantially different to those that happened before. However, what events are destined to happen will always happen.
Yeah, that was something that I was getting a little bit stuck on, I guess, like the events that happen after the fact and the events that happen before the fact. Essentially, if all the events that are supposed to happen will happen, regardless of whether you feel regret, guilt, or shame about them, there really is no difference between a realized person and a regular. In other words, the functioning isn't different between you and me, right?
That's, well, yes, I think it's fair to say that. But let's also remember that the realization itself is destined. And so that is not separate from the circumstance. So the realization doesn't happen because of something outside of destiny. The realization itself is part of destiny. And so there is in a way, there is an interconnectivity between the realization when it's destined to happen and the events that are so the events aren't put in place irrespective of someone's attitude. The attitude and the events are all part of what is predetermined.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. This, I mean, this is just from my upbringing. I guess the concept of like karma features very strongly, in my just spiritual journey, so to say. This also means that karma, the concept of karma also doesn't really make sense, right? Like,
that's right. It's karma is just simple cause and effect without a doer. So it might mean that a human being is forced to do what is referred to as bad action. And so if they're forced to do bad action, who is to blame? Who is to be punished? There is no doer that can be punished. However, the laws of karma, if there are laws of karma that recognize this, may mean that there is a consequence for the bad action. Now, the bad action is not the bad action of a doer, but the bad action of destiny. And the bad action of destiny, because let's say this is a story of cause and effect, a story of life. And as part of the rules of engagement or the rules of the creation of life, maybe karmic rules are part of the unfolding of it. But we have to look at it, and if we see everything as destiny, then the bad action was destined to happen, and the consequence is destined to happen. And if we don't see it like that, then we look at the bad action and say, that was your bad action. And then when there is a consequence, we see, that is your karma.
cool. Yeah, that makes sense. That's kind of in line with where my thinking was as well. So it's good to hear the point of views that you bring up. Awesome. Thank you so much.
And I'll just one last thing that pertains to this question is there's a text called Tripurya Rahasya, which talks about the non-dual unfolding, the non-dual understanding. And it sort of talks about stages of liberation, stages of enlightenment. And so there is a stage of enlightenment where the sage realizes that they are not the doer. And in that awakening, it said their karma falls away. Now, it depends how you interpret what that means. So what it's saying is there is a realization that they are not the doer, and so their karma falls away. If we interpret it, it could mean like the end of karma. It's not saying, it's not really talking about the end of karma, it's saying the end of the identification with karma, the end of the claiming ownership over karma as my good karma or my bad karma. So it goes on to say the body karma will continue. So what it's particularly pointing out, so when it says the body karma will have to play itself out, it means that circumstance will continue to happen and the body might get cancer, right? Which is referred to as body karma, meaning the unfolding of circumstance. The sage's attitude to it is, yes, that is a happening, that is life unfolding, but it's no longer his karma as the doer. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah. So from the individual perspective, there can be karma. But if you drop the individual and it is truly understood that you are not the doer, karma would automatically fall away, or like the identification with it lessens because you're no longer.
Yes, it becomes impersonal.
So the act of also trying to prevent the cancer would then be good karma, right? So to speak.
Yeah, well, if it doesn't succeed, you could say it's a good intention, but pointless. So yeah, the act of trying to prevent the karma, I would say, is more karma. It's destiny. I mean, to prevent it or to cure it?
To prevent it, or like to try to do something about it. It's just the conundrum is like, as an individual, would you try to change the situation, or like the act of motivating yourself to change the situation, does that gather karma, or would a person who is self-realized even try to change the outcome of cancer, is what I'm trying to get at.
Yes, to some extent, when and it really depends on what the feelings are that arise, which is also not in your control. So you have the example of take Jesus in Christianity as a metaphor for liberation. At some point in the story, as I had heard it, the Romans, who were meant to be sort of acting to appease the Jews, and this is all the story. It's not about Romans and Jews and Jesus and whatever, but Jesus at some point apparently had the opportunity to sort of defend himself against the accusations of blasphemy or heresy or whatever the accusations were. And if he didn't defend himself, the outcome was death. And similarly, at some point, he was free and soldiers came to collect him, and his apostles stood up and wanted to fight. And in fact, the story goes Saint Peter chopped off the ear of one of the soldiers, and Jesus healed him. And in a sense said, no, don't fight, I'm surrendering myself. He had spent 40 days in the desert fighting with the demons because he could see how destiny was going to play out. And so in that situation, on several occasions, you could see he was resigned to his destiny. So he had struggled with God, why is this my destiny in the desert for the 40 days? And then at the end of the 40 days, it seemed like he had come to terms with his destiny. And so at that point, a fighting against destiny didn't happen. Now, on the other hand, if his story was a different story, and if different feelings, different thoughts, different urges came up, maybe because he wasn't destined to end up dying on the cross, then he may have decided to flee. And that fleeing may have ended up in him not dying because it wasn't destiny for him to die, or he may have been caught and killed anyway. So it really comes down to whatever destiny is what will happen. Now, the realized person is not going to fight against destiny once the inevitability of it has been seen. So if someone gets cancer and it's clear that there's no escape from it, then there'll be a surrender to the fact that, okay, this is how I'm going to die. If, however, the doctor says, you have cancer, but it's early stages, and you with these treatments or with this change in your lifestyle or diet, there's a possibility of it going into remission, then by all means, the liberated person will say, you tell me what to do and I'll probably do it. So it comes down to the inevitability of things and how that's felt in the individual.
Excellent. Yeah, that's exactly the fact that is troubling me a little bit, I guess, like the actions that take place after realization takes place. And it's not like a resignation. There could be things that he would try, but once there is a sense of inevitability that nothing else can be done, peacefully accept the fact.
Yes. And that's why the notion of acceptance doesn't at all mean don't do your best. So it says, do your best to improve the situation. And once you've done your best, sit back, relax, and see what the outcome is.
Excellent. Yeah. And it's just, I guess, most of the non-dual teachings, I don't know. I mean, it's not necessarily you, I guess, but there are other teachers as well who talk a lot about acceptance and surrender. There sometimes can be a hint of like passivity that people might garner from such information, right? Which was what was troubling me a little bit, and I wasn't sure how to bridge that gap. This makes it a little bit more clear, like at least for my understanding.
Yeah, the reasons why teachings will not necessarily, each teaching will do it differently, is that often the main problem, especially early on in the seeking, is that there is an obsession with changing outcomes. And so a teaching is really interested in breaking that obsession. And so sometimes the best way of bringing that about is to introduce the opposite. And the opposite is rarely the middle path. The middle path is usually outside of interconnected opposites. So if we're obsessed with changing outcomes. What tends to break that is where we are obsessed with not changing outcomes. And that actually becomes, it still is involvement in a way. It's sort of like when someone is on a renunciation path, the attitude on the renunciation path is usually pleasure is the problem. And then we renounce pleasures where we see pleasure as the enemy.
Yes.
And in a way, we're pushing pleasures away. Eventually, the middle path sets in where we realize that pushing away pleasures was not balance, but was the opposite of grabbing onto pleasures.
Yes.
However, the process of renunciation where you're pushing away pleasures, which seems like, based on what I'm describing, as the wrong thing to do, is very effective at breaking the attachment to pleasure. So it breaks the attachment to pleasure, but eventually that needs to be corrected so that it is the right attitude instead of what's pushing away? Resisting of pleasure. So eventually we need to come to a point where we're very happy to indulge in pleasure when it's available, understanding that it's going to always come to an end and be replaced by pain. That's the flow of life. So that analogy can also be used with this notion of acceptance. At first, we start off where acceptance leads to a passivity. And then at some point we realize, oh no, I can accept and at the same time still do my best. So if you come across a beggar on the street, acceptance in its early stages might be where you just become oblivious or passive to functioning in a way, where you might sort of just say, well, it's their destiny to be a beggar. And in the end, it might be, it's their destiny to be the beggar and my destiny to give them 10 rupees.
Yes.
So then it means, oh, that doesn't mean that you can't do your best.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's wonderful. I can keep talking to you for the rest of the day, so I'll let you go. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Krishna. I think we'll take the last question. Hello, Michael.
Hi, Roger. Hi. Thanks again for your satsangs. I really enjoyed them too. And my question is a little related to the medical thing regarding what's your view of when there's intense suffering to take medication like antidepressants or sleeping pills? Do you have any view on that?
I don't really have a strong view on it. Because I do see that when it's really intense, there are people. I've seen friends actually recently when anxiety and depression was really intense, to the point where they really didn't recognize themselves in their life, that medication made a big difference to them, and they were very grateful for the fact that that was available. And so in some cases, medication can create a space that simply is lost when the suffering is very intense. And from that place where there is some space, maybe something more productive and something more beneficial can happen. And then again, there's plenty of stories about people that, have tried medication for years and it hasn't agreed with them, it hasn't helped them, it's made things worse in some cases. So I personally would say I wouldn't rule anything in or out. I wouldn't say, I shouldn't or I should. And at the appropriate time, be open to seeing what feels most appropriate. Take medical advice, take it with a grain of salt to some extent, which means don't take it as truth, but at the same time, don't assume everything that the doctor says is rubbish. So I think that's about the most close to how I feel about it that I can put into words at this point.
Yeah, okay, that's fine. Thank you. I just was curious because, yeah, I'm taking it now, but only as a temporary thing. So, yeah, I don't think anything helps or hinders this because whatever this is destiny unfolding, as you say, and that's the path. So, yeah. Thank you.
Yes. I hope. Let's hope it all works out for the best. I think if you do it with the right attitude and with as much consideredness as possible, then it probably will be very valuable information for you. You get to try it and see the benefits or see the effects, and register that so that then you know whether it's something to pursue going forward.
Okay, thank you, Roger.
Thank you all.